welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole. Welcome if you're new here. Today we are going into some of the creepiest pasta stories ever. So we'll probably do about 5 of them because they are quite large. So let's start off. We're going to go right into this one here, and it's called The Smiling Man. So if you guys aren't aware of what is the Smiling Man, he is very lanky, very tall, has like a really creepy smile. And if you look it up on YouTube, there's a man, a guy, and this is part of the story. I could just basically sum it down because this is what I remember. He was walking, because this is a regular average Joe, likes to go for walks at night while his friends are sleeping or his roommates are sleeping, and then this is where he comes across the Smiling Man. So let me read the story to you. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often myself bored after my roommate, who is decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night. I never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even though the drug dealers in that city were polite, but all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. And I was walking near a police patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, and with very little traffic and almost no one-on-one foot. So, wait, oh my gosh, almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lengthy, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, a head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly nerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move once I had put about a half a block between us. I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I still felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very quickly. I like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the Smiling Man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling, his smile still looking up to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" Oh, sorry, forgot. What the F do you want? An angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper of "what the F," Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He stood there smiling, and then after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again. I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight, and then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me, then he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see a stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. So I don't know if I could say those words, but I apologize if I couldn't. Story number 2 is the real Chuck E. Cheese. Have you ever thought that there was something the creators of Chuck E. Cheese were hiding something from us all? Or have you ever found something to be off about the place? Even the creepy robotic mascots that danced on stage. I didn't until I found out the truth about Chuck E. Cheese. It all began the first time I had ever visited the place. I was around the age of 5 or 6, so I, of course, was pretty ecstatic to go seeing all those commercials of kids eating pizza and running around without a care in the world. On arcade games on the play structure made me almost get down on my hands and knees to plead and beg my mom to take me. After finally getting her to break, she took me. I was the happiest kid in the whole world. My mom drove me over just a few hours before evening, so maybe around 4:30 or so. I almost knocked over the woman at the door who gave you the little stamp on your hand, running ahead of my mom and bursting through the doors like a maniac child. Eventually, I was stamped and literally screeching as I ran to all the game and play sets. After a bit, I stumbled on over to a game like a whack-a-mole, but with sharks right by the staff-only room. One shark whacking a minute later, I'd won the game. Before I could squeal in success and collect my tickets, my ears caught the sound of something very strange going on near the staff-only room. I could only hear someone say, "Test number 15 on mutated rat results in angered behavior, such as throwing a desk and scientists at the wall." I then began to wonder what in the world could they be talking about. Maybe they were making a new game. Being so young, I had no idea at all what was actually going on in there. Being curious and feeling a bit interested, I pressed myself against the door and listened in as carefully as a 6-year-old could. I could hear them snapping at each other. Things like, "What are we going to do with this beast? And get it away from me." A mumbled shout poured over whoever was in there and replied with a louder, "We can just kill that thing. It's a beast version of our mascot." The talking stopped. I blinked for a second and pressed myself closer on the door. I quickly realized that this was a very bad mistake. As the door opened from my weight against it, I slipped in, going from leaning on the door to falling face flat on the ground of the staff room. Immediately footsteps trampled over to me, hands grabbing at my arms. I was out like a light in a few seconds, and I still don't know what the heck they did to do that. I woke up slowly, my eyes feeling heavy and my body feeling weak. In some kind of interrogation room, a tall man with a serious expression, wearing the cleanest white lab coat I'd ever seen, began walking towards me out of the blue, like he knew I'd be awake, like he knew I was awake. His voice was deep and it was scratchy from what I could tell, that when he began to speak, don't you? "You know," he said. I was a 6-year-old, half knocked out at Chuck E. Cheese, so I didn't know what they expected from me. I babbled for a second, letting my tongue function correctly. "What?" I replied dumbly, blinking hazily. He grabbed my arm, making the static feeling intensify somehow. He pulled me a bit, making me whine, though I quickly shut my toddler trap when a loud banging on the door echoed throughout the room. Naturally, me being so young and clueless, I screamed, thrashing around. The man let go of me, snapping at me to shut my mouth. Forgetting about almost everything, I thrashed around some more, slipping out of my chair. I kicked my legs, going into the corner of the room. I screamed again, banging my foot against something, making a loud metal clang against my foot. I twisted around and whined down at an air vent. I kicked it again out of scared, hot anger. With another loud scream and clang, the metal front popped off again, letting out a shriek. When I heard the man stomping towards me out of the noise of clawing metal and banging, I scooted inside, spitting at him. I was scared half to death. I mean, what was I doing here? Where was my mom? He swiped at me for a moment, but quickly pulled his hand back. There was another loud bang, and the man stepped back. Using my tiny little hands, I grabbed the air vent's door and pulled it back, pressing it on the door. Just in time, a piercing hiss was followed by a shout from the stranger, and the loudest bang on the door. I crawled back, scooting back into the vent. I had to leave. Even being so young, I knew I was in trouble. I hastily turned around with a bit of a struggle, slowly crawling down the vent. A loud man scream echoed through the vent, being followed by more. They were in unison with the sound of cracking and tearing, which I now know was flesh and bone from the stranger. I got out as fast as I could. A small light was around the corner after a few minutes, and I stomped on it. The opening of the vent easily popped open. They really weren't paying attention to how tightly they were screwed on. Were they? My feet stumbled as I climbed out, but were soon trampling to where I saw my mom last, and she was still there with a worried expression on her face. I ran up to her, hugging her tight. My eyebrows were now glazed with wet, hot tears. I wanted to go home. I just wanted to go home. I want to go home, I whined and I complained. My mother gave me a strange look, but a finger on my cheek. You must be tired, sweetheart. She cooed, picking me up. I clenched my small fists, holding tightly onto her shirt. We walked out of the building, me being so lovingly carried to the car. A distant roar of sirens in the distance became a bit louder, and police cars pulled into the large parking lot and skidded to a halt in front of once amazing and fun Chuck E. Cheese. My mother almost ran to the car, quickly buckled me into my car seat. A couple hours later, home and safe that night, I walked out of my room to get some water before I went to bed. A habit of me trying to procrastinate so I didn't have to sleep, and my mother was watching the news. The reporter was talking about some kind of mutated rat coming out of Chuck E. Cheese and disappearing down the alleyways. So what happened to the real Chuck E. Cheese, God only knows, but I'll never, and I repeat, never go into Chuck E. Cheese for as long as I live. That is so creepy. Oh, that was like so intense too. For a 6-year-old to experience all of that, I'm assuming this is just a story, but if it was real, that is creepy. I would never walk into something like that again if that happened to me. Oh wow. I thought there was 44 of them. Huh. Let's see. Start reading. There we go. Okay. You know what? Let's leave it at the Chuck E. Cheese because that one was creepy. That one was creepy enough, I thought. And same with the smiling man. Tell me which one you would prefer to experience or not at all. I mean, I don't wish that upon anyone, but like if one were to scare you the least, or the other one to scare you the most. Let me know in the comments below, and you guys have a great rest of your evening, and we'll chat soon. Bye now.